What is inflation? Why are some people frustrated with inflation? How is inflation calculated? Find out all of this and more in this Finance Storyteller video. Inflation is the action of inflating something, or the condition of being inflated. When we discuss the economy, inflation means an increase in prices. To most people, inflation is the story of a salary increase that vanishes. Jim just got home from work after his annual performance appraisal. He got a small salary increase of 2%. Nothing spectacular, but at least his salary is going up. On the same day, the latest inflation numbers are published. Prices have gone up by 1.5% in the past 12 months. If Jim gets a nominal salary increase of 2%, while inflation is 1.5%, then the real growth in his purchasing power is around 0.5%. Frustrating, isn't it? So how is this 1.5% inflation calculated? The 1.5% is the outcome of a lot of data gathering and a lot of calculations for a profile called a typical consumer. A typical consumer spends 70% of income on housing, rent, housing maintenance, water, electricity, that kind of stuff. Prices for housing have gone up 2.6%. A typical consumer spends 15% of income on transport, buying and running a car and using other transport services. Prices for transport have gone up by 1.2%. The list goes on and on. Some categories, like alcohol and tobacco, might have prices that are up 4%. Other categories might even see a price decline. Inflation is the weighted average of the price increases or decreases by category, using the percentage of income as the weight. The inflation number you hear about in the news might not be what you personally experience or perceive as inflation. It could vary based on your personal spending pattern. Let's say that Jim lives in an expensive location and spends 25% of his income on housing. He hasn't bought a new car in a long time and hardly even uses his current car, so his spending on transportation is just 10% of his income. He spends 20% of his income on food, 15% on alcohol and tobacco, and just 1% on communications. In short, he spends a higher percentage of his income on categories where prices have gone up more. For Jim, his personal inflation number is around 2.1%, higher than the 1.5% inflation for the typical consumer, and higher than the 2% nominal salary increase he received. Well, the solution seems very simple, right? How about we give Jim a bigger salary increase of 6%? That could work if Jim and only Jim gets 6%, while everybody else gets 2% or less. If a lot of people in the country get a 6% salary increase, then the cost of producing goods and services would go up, and companies might pass on this cost increase in their selling prices, driving up inflation. This is called a price-wage spiral. Price increases causing wage increases, and wage increases causing price increases. Jim would still have real growth in his purchasing power of around 0.5%, and he would still be frustrated. If the price-wage spiral gets out of hand, a country could get into a very turbulent situation called hyperinflation. This is when you use a wheelbarrow as a wallet, as you need a big pile of cash to buy a loaf of bread. Or when the price of your cup of coffee has doubled between the time you order it in the restaurant and the time you ask for the bill. Hyperinflation can cause a lot of economic and social instability, and most countries try to avoid it. What is the effect of inflation on salaries, savings and debt? As we saw in Jim's example, inflation can make salary increases vanish. It will also eat up part of your savings, as these will have less purchasing power in the future. Hopefully your savings get you an interest rate that is higher than inflation. Inflation also eats up part of your debt, so depending on how much debt you have, inflation might actually be a net positive for you. Inflation is not a new phenomenon. Copernicus, yep, that's the same guy that figured out that the Earth revolves around the Sun, wrote about it in the early 16th century. He observed an increase in prices following the import of gold and silver used in the coinage of money from the New World. Which brings us to the role that central banks play in controlling inflation. A useful conceptual way to look at inflation is the equation M times V equals P times Q. The amount of money in an economic system times the velocity, how quick money moves around in transactions, equals the price level times the quantity of goods and services produced. The concern of Copernicus was that if the quantity of goods and services produced stays the same, and the velocity of money stays the same, while you increase the amount of, in those days, gold and silver coins in the system, then automatically price levels go up. Prudent monetary policy would prescribe that if the quantity of goods and services is up, while velocity stays the same, then the amount of money in the economic system needs to go up in order for the price levels to stay stable. That's easy to understand at the conceptual level, but not so easy to implement in dynamic and open economies where the goods and services we buy are changing all the time. If you read the Federal Reserve goals, stable prices, along with maximum employment and moderate interest rates, is one of the mandates. The European Central Bank even calls maintaining price stability its main task. That doesn't mean inflation should be micromanaged to the decimal point. Some variation is natural in an organic system like the economy. Too much top-down forced stability may even lead to economic blow-ups. Want to learn more about business, finance, accounting and investing? Then subscribe to the Finance Storyteller YouTube channel. Thank you.